Thank you for joining us today. So we are going to go ahead and get started. We got the recording going, and we are going to be talking on the new annual financial review process. And I'm going to let Hannah launch the pre-poll, so we make sure we get that going. And as people are filling that out, we have Pearl here today from the North Dakota State Auditor's Office, and she's going to be talking on submitting the new annual financial review to the state, what that means, what are the effects if you don't do it, the fiscal reporting requirements in the North Dakota Century Code. So I'm going to pass it over to her, but we will give you guys a couple, maybe another minute or so to fill out this pre-poll, which is basically, are you receiving updates and reminders from the North Dakota State Auditor's Office? And so we would love to know if you are getting those updates. If you're not, we would like to get your email on this list so Pearl can take that back and make sure that you're getting the updates as needed. Is there anything you want to add, Pearl, to that? I don't know how
Yeah,
often you're sending information, or if they would miss it accidentally, or if it's coming straight from you.
right. So currently, if a district is behind on reporting, we do send out, those physical letters to their mailing addresses, um, just notifying them and giving them information on how to get current. But then also, I do send out information and updates from the Office of Good Government. So if there are any changes to legislation, just this last year we had quite a few changes to North Dakota Century Code. So I will send out emails with updates there. But it really depends. So I get those emails from our client list in our auditing system. So let's say there's a district where they've had turnover and maybe their email address isn't, one main email address and it's, attached to an individual. So if they leave, we might not get the new contact updated. So that might be a reason why someone might not be receiving information and communication from our office.
Yeah, so we'll try to, as new folks come in to try and remember to send their contact over to you as well. All right, I'm going to hand it over to you, and we'll go ahead and get started. And we will have time at the end for some Q&A as
Okay,
well. Yeah.
perfect.
If you have any questions, write them down, or you can always put them in the chat too. Feel free to put them in the chat. We'll be watching those and monitoring those, and ask as they come in.
Okay, I'm just going to share my screen here. Let me know when it's
Perfect.
okay.
Good to
Can
go.
you see the full screen there?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So we just made changes to the annual financial review process here at the North Dakota State Auditor's Office. And I should probably introduce myself. My name is Pearl LaCoursiere. I'm the training and education coordinator here at the North Dakota State Auditor's Office. I work mainly within the Office of Good Government, providing training materials and just answering questions that people might have about this process. I do work mainly with smaller districts, so meaning just like small governments that receive less than 2 million in annual receipts. So that's kind of what I do here at the office. Usually, if you call our office with questions, you probably talk to me. Hopefully, it's been a good experience if you have, and if it wasn't, then you probably didn't talk to me. But, anyways, so yeah, we just made changes to the annual financial review process, and we wanted to highlight them and share them with you. And especially, there were some changes made that will hopefully help soil conservation districts in filling out this form. We did tailor it a little bit to make it more accessible and easier for the soil conservation districts to use. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the North Dakota Century Code. So that's where it talks about how to be compliant with the law and what the law is for financial reporting for districts. And then we also are going to talk about the audit thresholds and then single audit requirements, what an audit is versus a review, and then the new annual financial review process. And I do apologize. I am just getting over a sickness, so my voice is pretty scratchy, so I might be coughing and such here and drinking water. So I do apologize for those interruptions. So moving right into it, so North Dakota Century Code so it's 54-1014. This is basically the North Dakota State Auditor's Office section of code, and within that section of code, it talks about all the different districts that and the requirements for reporting annual financials to our office. So really, it's an audit requirement. So it's a biannual audit requirement, and that's what basically fulfills that financial reporting requirement to our office. So an audit can be done by our office, by the North Dakota State Auditor's Office, or by a CPA firm in the state of North Dakota, and then that audit report gets sent to our office. We would review that, and then with a standardized checklist to make sure that everything was done properly in that. And then it is a 2 million audit threshold. So all districts that receive more than 2 million would have to get an audit done, but all districts that receive less than 2 million in annual receipts can opt out of that audit process and can fill out annual financial review forms and submit those annually to our office. And is basically in lieu of an audit, but it still counts for that financial compliance piece. And then so the financial statement audit, that would be if you would go out and have our office do it, or if you would have a CPA firm do the audit for your district. Now, when we looked at the numbers, I think that most soil conservation districts do fall under that 2 million threshold. I think there may be one or two that are above that 2 million threshold. So they automatically have to get an audit based on how much they take in revenue each year. But most of them are below, most soil conservation districts are below that 2 million annual receipt threshold. So they can opt out to fill out the annual financial review form. And I do want to note here that as a district, you can choose to get an audit even if you are under that. We don't ever want to discourage someone from going out and getting the audit. The reason why we did increase that threshold to such a high number like 2 million is because we have a shortage of CPAs in the state of North Dakota. So the cost of audits is super high. Um, and it's just easier if you could fill out an annual financial review form. It doesn't always provide the same assurance, but it does make it a little bit easier for you guys to stay compliant. And also, it also has a bit of like the fiscal responsibility with it. It is cheaper to, do an annual financial review as well. And then I want to talk briefly about the single audit requirements. So this is an audit of federal expenditures, but the threshold for this is $750,000. So I know there are going to be a lot of number thresholds today. So the audit threshold is 2 million. Now, and that's for receipts, that's revenue. So that's everything you bring in. That'd be tax dollars, federal grants, state grants, and that would be like any sort of business activities that you might have. I know the districts that you might sell trees or you might offer services. So that's all of your revenue. Now, the single audit requirement is how much this is applies to how much you spend of federal money. So the threshold here is $750,000. So if your district spent it doesn't matter when you received it. It's if you spent over $750,000 of federal funds in one year, then you would have to get a single audit, and that's basically a portion. It audits those federal funds, and then you also get a financial statement audit with that. So you can't just get a single audit. You'd have to get a financial statement audit as well. And I don't know how much this applies to many districts, soil conservation districts, if you guys get a lot of federal funds or not. But I did just want to mention it that there are a couple of different scenarios where you might actually have to get an audit and you wouldn't be able to fill out the annual financial review form and work with that process. And they did just increase this threshold as well. So they increased this threshold to 1 million. So this will be for all audit periods ending September 30th, 2025. But I don't think it'll apply too much. And if you do have questions about where you're sitting for how much you have in revenues and how much you have in expenditures, you can always contact our office, which should be able to get you pointed in the right direction if you're not sure about it. Okay, so jumping into the review overview. So now I'm going to stop talking about all the audit stuff and information. Like I said, if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to us and contact us about that. We'll provide you with any information that we can. But now I want to talk specifically about for all the districts that don't have to get audits each year, and they can fill out these annual financial review forms. So this does apply, like it does give less assurance than an audit does. It doesn't go in depth like everything else does. But with the new process, we've started to add in more. So there's more testing that we will do now with it. If there's a district of a certain size, maybe you received X amount of revenue, or you had this kind of activities going on. There is more testing that we might do. And now you might be familiar with the terms of a basic review and extended review, and we've kind of done away with both of those processes now. So now we just combine it into one process, but depending on the size, because the state of North Dakota has districts of all different types and sizes, it depends on, maybe you fit the box of, maybe you had a construction project that exceeded $500,000. We would test the construction, the bids, would test some of the receipts, the invoices with the construction project. So we might just test more in some areas, and then here and there, just depending on the size of your district. But within this process, we do look to see that the bank balance equals the cash balance. And that's specifically, we kind of change that terminology around for the soil conservation districts, because most soil conservation districts they track inventory, they track um, accounts receivable, accounts payable. You might have all those things. So, meaning that your books aren't cash basis. They aren't on a cash basis. They might be on a modified cash or an accrual. So, we look to see that what you have in the bank equals what you have as your cash balance on your balance sheet. And then we review the accuracy of the numbers. So, we check what you put on the annual financial review form, and we compare that with what is on your accounting records. We make sure that those agree. And the other thing we look at is if the funds have been used correctly. So in governmental accounting, there are a bunch of different types of governmental funds. And with each of those funds, there are restrictions and things that you can and cannot do with them, and they're used for different purposes. So we look to make sure that those have been used correctly and accurately as well. And then we also look to see that transfers have been made properly. And when I talk about transfers, I'm not talking about, transfers between the bank, from a checking to a savings, or a checking to a checking, or anything like that. When we talk about transfers, we mean transfers between the funds. So it could be a general fund transfer to a capital project fund, or vice versa. That's what we mean when we talk about transfer. When we use the terminology transfers. So moving into that cash balance, equaling the bank balance. So because you have a modified cash basis statements, for filling out this new form, you will need your balance sheet to fill out the form, because that's going to show your cash and investments line, which should equal your bank balance. But into that bank balance and that cash balance, we also have reconciling items. So at year end, you'll need to be recording all of those reconciling items. And as well as throughout the year, we always want to encourage that every district is doing monthly bank reconciliations. So they're keeping track of where all of their reconciling items might be at. And then also the investments. So that could be CDs and how they're being cashed and that sort of thing. And then also, so the bank balance is made up of all those things, and then the bank accounts as well. So your checking, savings, mainly we just see those two different types of accounts there, and then money markets as well. That's another big one we see. And then we look to make sure that your fund usage has been correct. So the general fund can most things can be done out in and out of the general fund. So the general fund is not super specific, as there are no restrictions on how the money can be spent, aside from if it's legal person North Dakota Century Code, but there's no specific restrictions on what can be spent out of the general fund. And your special revenue funds, if you do have those are just restricted to be spent on the purpose for which the funds have been received for, which is kind of that's kind of a mouthful. That's kind of a lot. But one good example of this is, so the cities in North Dakota receive what is called highway tax dollars. So those highway tax dollars are required to go into a special revenue fund per North Dakota Century Code. But then in North Dakota Century Code, there are restrictions on what those highway tax dollars can be spent on, and that's specifically for bigger projects, and like big maintenance projects on roads, basically. So that's a good example of what a special revenue fund is. And then a capital project fund. This is if you're building something major, or maybe there's maybe there's a piece of equipment that you're purchasing that's going to be quite large, and you want to keep track of it in a separate fund. That would be a capital project, but commonly we see it for like new buildings. We'll see that people using capital project funds for those. And then a debt service fund, that is just typically used to track bonded debt. The prior recommendation from our office was to set up a debt service fund anytime that you had a loan or if you had debt that took longer than a year to pay off. That's no longer the case. We've kind of switched that to only if it's absolutely necessary or it's legally required. And in those cases, typically you're going to see debt service funds that go along with bonded debt. And then the other type there, the enterprise funds, that's for your business type activities. So if you are have a service or you're operating something where you need to cover the costs of this extra business that you're doing, which is outside of your normal function, then you would create an enterprise fund. And now I say that because like I mentioned earlier, soil conservation districts do offer services that you charge for, but because it's like a function of your district, it wouldn't necessarily have to be its own special enterprise fund because it's still an operating function of your district, if that makes sense. And I can clarify that if you have any questions about that, please ask them. We'll try and clarify that as best we can. And that last type of governmental fund is a custodial fund. That's a pass through fund. So if you were receiving money for another district, or it was supposed to go elsewhere and it wasn't to be used by your district, then you would receive it and you would pass it through. We do commonly see these in cities. I haven't seen too many in soil conservation districts, but like I said, it can always happen, so we want to mention it when we can. So moving on to transfers. So this is when I was talking about the difference that a like the bank transfers that you have between your, checking or savings is not the same as a transfer between your account or between your funds. So here when I talk about debits equaling credits, so on the annual financial review form, there's a spot to put in your transfers in and your transfers out. That number should always be equal. So the transfers in should equal your transfers out, because you can't transfer, a little bit of money to another one and have not the same amount go into the or sorry, into that fund, if that makes sense. So those do need to equal. So your debits are there and your credits have to equal for the transfers. And so then have a note there as well that your funds, those are not your bank accounts, those are your funds. And I just want to talk about the restrictions, concerning transfers. So always allowable are general fund. You can always transfer money out of the general fund and into the fund. There are no specific restrictions on transferring out of and in and out of the general fund. Now, for closing accounts, the only type of transfers that are allowable are for special revenue funds, capital project funds, and debt service funds. You can only make a transfer to close those out. You couldn't make a transfer from a special revenue fund to a general fund just because you wanted to maybe cover a deficit or something, or give more funds to a different fund. You can't do it for those reasons. It has to be for to close out those funds. And then with restrictions are the enterprise funds, and typically you're going to see this mainly in cities, but you can only transfer out 20% of the revenue that you received in that year. That's what's allowable for out of those enterprise funds. And then never allowable is custodial funds, because what goes in must go out. So the fund must have a zero balance at year end for those. So then moving on to the new form. So I do want to talk quite a bit about this, the new changes that we've had to it. So last year when I presented, I did go through and I talked about, I gave you specific examples on the form. This year I kind of want to go high level, and just show like the biggest changes, because the form does look different, but it's the main components, the main point is still there on the form. So I want to encourage you to, go out and fill it out for yourself. And if you do have questions, contact us, give me a call. We should be able to get those answered for you. But a lot of the times that there are specific situations. So I want you to be able to figure that out. So yeah, I'm just not going to do the examples this year, but I'm just going to more talk about the biggest changes that we have here, and especially for the soil conservation districts. So to fill out this activities tab, you're going to need a profit and loss from your accounting system and a balance sheet. So, and I want to point out right here, I hope you guys can see this, but I have there circled in yellow the beginning fund balance. So for your beginning fund balance, you're going to use the equity lines from your balance sheet, and it's going to be your opening balance equity plus your retained earnings per fund. And those are the numbers that are going those are the numbers that are going to go into your beginning fund balance. That's how you will determine your beginning fund balance. And then, so the net income line will match your current year activity on the form. So this line right here, the current year activity, so that net income line should match that when you fill that out. And your total equity should match your total cash and investments down here. So, and this will only apply to your true cash balance of your checking, savings, petty cash, and CD income on the balance sheet. And that line, so this line here, that's made up of your total cash and investments, which is your checking, savings, petty cash, and CD, that should tie out to your bank statements at year end. Because so you're not going to be looking, previously you'd be tying out this ending fund balance to what is on your cash and investments tab, but we're not doing that. We're tying out this total cash and investments down here. That will be tied out to your cash and investments tab basically. And the reason for that being is that most districts, again, record inventory, accounts receivable, and accounts payable. And that's going to mess with what your actual fund balance is. But this is the simplest way that we could kind of solve that problem. So your ending fund balance isn't going to match your, normally isn't going to match your cash balance. But we just changed it this way so that it would be a simpler way for you guys to fill it out, for us to get them approved. Um, and just so we just trying to change the process up a little bit there, but it might be a bit confusing. But if you do have questions about what lines to use from your balance sheet to fill out the form, just give us a call. We've been working with this for a while, and so far this has worked out really well, and things are balancing, and things it has been working out pretty well so far. So
So
that's
before you
sorry, go
sorry,
ahead.
before you move on to the next slide, I just wanted to jump on. There was a question in the chat. If you could just repeat, go back for a moment and repeat where to get the beginning fund
Oh
balance
yeah,
form from.
yes, absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, I can't see the questions right now. I just
No,
have it in
you're good.
PowerPoint mode, so I can't see those. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Okay, so for the getting your beginning fund balances, you're going to use your equity lines, which is your opening balance equity and retained earnings by fund. And that will be from your balance sheet, and you'll use that for your beginning fund balances. Again, so that's your opening balance equity and your retained earnings by fund. Those are the lines you'll be using from your balance sheet. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next. All right, so this is the cash investments tab. So back on the other slide, I was talking about, the difference. You have your ending fund balance, but then you have your total cash investments and what's tying out. So that green line at the very bottom of the annual financial review form, that's what's going to tie out to this page. So for this page, you're going to need your bank statements and your bank reconciliations at year end. So if you have a fiscal year end that's a calendar year ending, which would be December 31st, you would grab your bank reconciliation from December 31st to fill this out. So, excuse me. So you'd need your bank statement. So that's all of your, all of your accounts. So checking, savings, CDs, petty cash if you have it. So all of those will go on. This is where you enter all of that information. And again, it's pretty simple. You just have your account name, the type of account it is, which would be checking, savings, CDs, what have you, the bank or institution, and then the bank statement balance. And now I wish I would have included more of an example of this, but I don't know if you all can see this down here. We have the outstanding checks and outstanding deposits. Now, this is new from last year. We had a portion on, like we had a little, I guess it would be a column for it on the other form, but we added 2 new areas where you could enter these in on the form. So now we're requesting that you enter the check number, the outstanding check number, the account name, and the amount. So the account name down on the outstanding checks and deposits, that column is going to tie back to this column here on the top portion of the cash and investments. So when you enter that amount, it will automatically reduce from that line item, if that makes sense. I hope it does. Um, so it'll automatically reduce that amount. So you won't have to worry about automatically populating it or calculating that. Um, so yeah, so then again here, this is this cash investments tab. So you're going to need what your bank statement balances are, and then your bank reconciliation. And the reason we request that bank reconciliation and those outstanding checks and deposits is that it really it's a timing issue. So you write a check December 31st. Well, you have it recorded in your accounting system, but it hasn't hit the bank yet. So it hasn't gone through the bank. So your bank hasn't been debited yet, or whatever I think. Yeah, be debited. I can't remember. They're reversed. They're opposite in accounting and opposite in banking. But it hasn't come out of the bank yet. So you have a discrepancy between what your fund balance is showing lower, but your bank balance is showing higher because you haven't added, because that's not included. So that's why we want those outstanding checks and deposits included, because it could affect that balance. Okay, I'll move on to the next. And again, if you guys have any questions, put them in the chat box. I will answer those as I'm able here. Okay, and then moving on to just kind of the process. So once you get it submitted, so you go to our website, download the form. We now have a list of documents that we're requesting with it. So up front, before we start the review, we're going to be requesting all 12 months of bank statements for all checking accounts, and then for all savings, CDs, and money markets, we're just requesting a year-end statement. That should be a good summary of all the activities. And then we're also, if you have any debt, we're asking for a payment schedule to be included and sent in with that. And then we're asking for a profit and loss. Um, a trial balance would be another document you could use, but we're asking for some sort of accounting record so that we can verify what you put on the form is accurate to what you have on your accounting records. Um, so then you send your form, and you fill out the form, and then you would send that in to us with all of those other supporting documents, and then it gets received and uploaded into our online queue. So you can go out and check the status of your review. It's updated daily, so you can go out and check that at any time if you have questions about where your review is at, or if you're waiting for funding, or things like that. And that's another thing I did want to mention briefly. So if you're not compliant with state law and we're sending in these forms, it could cause a delay in funding. And if you might not get grants because of it. Some grant programs require that you have official, you know, financial information, which would be an audit or this annual financial review process. So we want to encourage you to get them in as soon as you can. It's easier to stay up to date, and send them in as soon as the year is completed, within that first quarter. So if your fiscal year ended December 31st, 2024, try to get that in within the first quarter of 2025. It's just easier for you, and it's easier just because the information is so much fresher in your head at that point. So sorry about that side note there. But yeah, so when you send it in to us, it gets uploaded into our online queue, and we review it in the order that's received. Unless you do want to expedite it, and we could expedite it for if you're waiting on funding. So if you have a grant that you need to apply for and you need it done, we will complete it fast. We will try to complete it faster for you guys if we can. And then there are a few different statuses, but we do explain that out on the annual financial review process, or out on the queue. But then your results, so what your annual financial report gets sent out, and this can include comments or suggested changes. But I do want to mention here the other biggest change that we made to the annual financial review process is now we send out an annual financial report. So it's loosely based on what an audit report looks like, but it's going to include an explanation of what we did, what we looked at during the annual review, It's going to include a financial summary, a debt table if you had debt, or if your district's paying off any debt. And then it's going to include a letter with any sort of comments. And those are just the suggested changes that we have. And the other thing I was going to mention, have stopped really. We've stopped making adjustments unless we absolutely need to make them. So we are requesting a lot of documents up front to be sent to us, but then we are waiting to start on those until we have those because we want to make sure that we're not making any adjustments that aren't necessary adjustments. Because if there is something that's wrong or if there is a discrepancy, we want to make sure that when you go in to your system or your accounting system to make an adjustment, that it is right and is not going to cause further issues for your district when you in the future. So again, we really only are making comments and suggesting changes if we find something that's actually wrong, or we've done enough research into using the documents that you provided to find that there is a balance discrepancy. So I just want to put that out there that that's another big change from the process before to the process now as well. So what to do if you're past due? So we're here to help. If you are, behind on your audits or behind on your annual financial reviews, contact our office. We want you to contact us. It's not, you're not going to be in trouble. Your district's not going to be in trouble or anything like that if you contact us. But we'll help you get current. We'll help you walk you through the process of how to fill out the form. And that's another thing I wanted to plug here. So schedule a free consultation if you are behind and you want to get the form filled out. You can schedule a free consultation with me. I hold them virtually over Teams. So if you can come to the meeting with your documents and the different things you have, and I'll just walk you through the process of how to fill things out, where things are at, and just how that works. So feel free to sign up for one of those. It's super easy. My calendar is available online to sign up for those free consultations. Um, let's see what else I want to mention here. Oh, and then I wanted to mention here that let's say you are maybe a newer bookkeeper or business manager and you're doing the books. If your books are a mess and you feel like, you're having trouble with them, we do recommend going out and finding a CPA firm or somebody, an accountant who can help you get your books in order. We've run into situations where some districts their books might be messed up, or someone wasn't keeping track of inventory, or their non-current assets weren't accurate. So they had assets listed on their accounting on their books that they don't actually have. So therefore their books are misrepresented. So if you are in a situation like that, or if you kind of inherited a mess, do get help. There are services that we can't offer because we do want to maintain independence, but go out and find those firms and see if there's something that can help you. At least, you don't always have to retain their services, but just to get things in order, that can always be very helpful as well. And then I want to mention here the learning series. So, the State Auditor's Office has recently started hosting free 1 hour virtual training series designed specifically for local government professionals handling accounting functions in small North Dakota governments. So, we'll be holding those all summer long. Um, our last one here is in September, and we'll have Alan Brinkman from North Dakota Surplus. So that should be a good one. So I highly encourage you to go out and sign up for those. It can just offer insights into different things, um, and give you information on topics that you might not know much about and can learn some more about something. Um, let me go here. And here's my contact information. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at any time. um, I'm always available. And again, like for free consultations, if you have questions about the form and you just want a little bit more help, feel free to sign up for one of those. And thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hopefully this was helpful. Do you guys have any other questions? I know we've had a couple in the chat, but do we have anything else? Or Hannah, if you have anything you want to add before we put up the post poll, so we don't forget to do that.
Um, Pearl, do you want to go ahead and put your contact
Oh
information
yeah.
in the chat? I think that would be really helpful. And don't worry, everybody, we will be sending a follow-up email. There was a bunch of links that I was putting into the chat. So just to review that, there's a link to the auditor's website that overviews the annual financial review process, and a lot of what Pearl talked about. Super user-friendly. I was going through it, and they've made some really awesome updates there. There's also a link to the online queue to see where submitted annual financial reviews are at in the process. That's links in the chat. Also super cool, Pearl. I can tell you guys have been like working really hard. Um, I did include a link because I feel like there might be some SCDs that have newer employees, and this might be something that's totally new to you. And so there is a link there just to see when the last time your soil conservation district submitted a audit or that annual financial review form to Pearl's office. Pearl, I guess on that, if people click on the link and they see that they see red and bold for 2024 and 2025, do you want to just quick explain that maybe don't panic yet, like you aren't on the chopping block?
Yeah, of course. If you see that it hasn't been submitted, it hasn't been done yet. So we just encourage trying to work through those and get those submitted as soon as you possibly can. Just because you want to avoid any sort of delaying in funds that it might be. Maybe you're trying to apply for a grant. You want to avoid any possible delays there, and just submit them. You're not in any trouble. Just contact us, reach out to us if you're really unsure where to start. We can get you in a good place, get you feeling better about the whole process. Typically, I get a lot of phone calls about people who they might be newer, they might not know the process, and just nervous about how to work through it, but I can explain things. And so just reach out to me. That's really the recommendation I have is if you do see any red or orange bolded letters that you haven't submitted, just contact us. We will help you and explain it. So
Thanks, Pearl. And then I searched the learning series, and yes, I put that in the chat as well. If folks are interested, it looks like your
oh, thank you.
September 11th one is stretching local budgets, how North Dakota surplus property supports local governments. So, yeah.
Yeah. It should be a good one. We'll have Alan Brakeman speaking, and he'll be talking about the North Dakota State Surplus Program and how to take advantage of the deals that are offered within that. So
Thank you so much. And again, these links will all be sent out to you. I'm already kind of forming the follow-up email. So once we do get the recording back and that is ready for you guys, that will be sent out along with all of these links. And we'll make sure that Pearl's contact is on there. So when you get this and are just listening to the recording for others that are not here, we'll put that contact on there so you can always reach out to her. If you have any other questions, I mean, you can always reach out to our team, Hannah as well, Amber. But we're probably going to send you to Pearl. So you can always reach out to us and ask us a question, but we're going to say, have you reached out to Pearl to have your one-on-one free consultation, or just reach out to her for any questions? So that's going to be definitely our recommendations. I understand this is probably very overwhelming. It's not an easy thing to go through some of these terms or hear some of these terms and go through the financial process of anything. If you're not an accountant, it can be very overwhelming. So it's great to have Pearl as a resource. So do not feel like you're alone. Don't feel like you have nobody to turn to or ask questions. So the post-webinar poll is up, so please fill that out. It'll just kind of help us gauge where you're at and what further information, education you guys would like. So any other questions?
Yes, there was one more in the chat. And we've got 15 of 28 people responding. So if, keep responding to the poll, pretty please. But Denise is wondering, is there a specific balance sheet to use, or is the old one in my computer files okay to use?
So excuse me, a balance sheet would be something that you pull from your accounting system. So typically, if you're recording accounts receivable and accounts payable, you will have a system where you're entering those numbers like QuickBooks. I know Black Mountain is a common one, but it'll be from your accounting software, and you'll pull it at your fiscal year end to fill it out. So it's something that will generate with the year's numbers from all of your activities, your accounting, your financial activities throughout the year in your accounting system.
And then Brianna was wondering, within the form, are there tips on where to find the numbers we should be putting in?
Yeah, so as far as explanations on where to put things, there is kind of a general, there is an instructions tab where we just give brief instructions on which numbers to put where. So there are brief instructions, but if you do have, oftentimes, there aren't, there's not like in-depth explanation and instructions for those specific situations. So for specific situations, just give our office a call and we can figure it out with you on where to put those different numbers.
Awesome. Thank you so much for those questions. If there's any other questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat. If you can, there's 3 questions in our post-webinar poll just to give us an idea of how helpful today's webinar was, and if there are any aspects that we could go more in depth with in a future webinar. We want feedback from all of you. We really appreciate that. And yeah, I guess that's all I have. Thank you all so much for hopping on, and I'll pass things back over to Lindy to wrap things up.
Yeah, just thanks again for joining us today. We will be having our next webinar on September 3rd, which will be on the SFAIR process. And so we hope you can join us for that. If you have any other questions, we're going to stop the recording, but we'll hang out for a little bit. And if anybody has any questions that they want, we'll hang out for a little bit. If you have any questions, feel free to stay on and ask. So have a great day and the rest of your week.